work out. But good evening, and thank you for joining us for the Utah Historical Society's Perspective Speaker Series. As 2025 marks the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, tonight's panel is part of a 6-part series that seeks to answer the question, what was Utah's World War II experience? By examining this topic from a variety of perspectives. Tonight's discussion will focus on how historians are helping to shape our understanding of Utah in World War II. We will discuss historical context, research methodologies, and diverse interpretations of Utah's vital role in the war. On my beautiful panel here, I have 3 wonderful historians that have agreed to answer all of our wonderful questions. And we'll start down at the end, down there. We have Lorrie Rands. Lorrie graduated right here from Weber State University with a BA in history and a master's in professional communications. She works as an oral historian and a manuscript processor for the special collections and university archives at the Stewart Library. She has also worked on various oral history projects, including All Out for Uncle Sam, World War II in Northern Utah, which we will get to hear a lot more about later tonight. Her senior thesis, Food, Comfort, and a Bit of Home, Maud Porter and the Ogden Canteen, 1942 to 1946, was published in the Utah Historical Quarterly, winter of 2016. And it's a great piece that we will probably be sending out to you all after this because it's just a piece that I think everyone should read. Right next to her, we have Branden Little. Professor Little is a professor of history here at Weber State University, where he researches the international history of the United States humanitarian relief and expeditionary warfare. He specializes in the era of the First and Second World Wars. He earned a PhD in history from the University of California, Berkeley, an MA in National Security Affairs from the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School, and his BA in International Relations and History from the University of California, Davis. So we're very excited to have Branden Little here, as he's going to be able to talk about both world wars and kind of the interplay that happens between them and the national narrative and Utah as well. You up for that, Professor Little?
I'll try.
And then to my left here, we have the esteemed Allan Kent Powell. Mr. Powell retired in 2013 as the managing editor of the Utah Historical Quarterly and a senior state historian. What a title, senior state historian, and the Utah State Historical Society. He is an author of numerous articles and several books, including Utah Remembers World War II. It's an incredible collection of oral histories that Mr. Powell conducted over his years at the Historical Society, which again, we will hear lots about tonight. And now understands World War I Diary, which received the Army Historical Foundation's Distinguished Writing Award for 2013. So we are very excited to have all 3 of you on this panel this evening. And I'm sure we're going to learn a lot about how historians have shaped our understanding of Utah in World War II. So to start off with, and we'll just do this open question style. So if anyone has a response, feel free to grab your mic and answer, unless I specifically ask you a specific question, and then we'll go from there. But to start with, so beyond the basic facts, how have historians' interpretations of Utah's defense industries, military training, and POW camps evolved? And how do you define the significance of these contributions to the overall World War II effort? So how has Utah kind of played into all of that national narrative?
Well, maybe I'll give my effort over first. As I read the question, I was thinking of the research that I have done. My connection with World War II has been with the book you mentioned, but also study of the German prisoners of war here in Utah. And so I thought to myself, how did that come about? And being a little autobiographical, my first recollection or understanding that there were German prisoners of war here in Utah was when I was in high school, and I grew up in Emery County. We would travel over to Salina for baseball games and so forth. And I remember one day as we were traveling through there, one of the teachers said, right over there is the hill where the American shot all of those Germans. And I had no clue why there were Germans there, why he shot them, anything that was about. And so that kind of piqued my curiosity as I heard about prisoners of war. This was about the time that movie, The Great Escape, came out. And I thought, well, if the Americans were escaping in Germany, I wonder if the Germans were escaping here. Nothing at all like the Americans were doing. The next step, my acquaintance with the prisoners of war was as a missionary in Germany. And as we went from door to door, knocking, ringing the bells, on 3 or 4 occasions, one of the older gentlemen said, "Yes, I was in Utah during World War II." And I couldn't figure out how he had ended up here. Got back, and then in the Historical Quarterly, Ralph Busso and Douglas Alder published an article in 1971 about the German prisoners of war, German and Italian prisoners of war in Utah and in Idaho. And they graciously made some of the interviews and contacts available to me about the time I decided that I wanted to do a full study. And so I proceeded with that, and the University of Utah Press published the book entitled Splinters of a Nation, The German Prisoners of War in Utah. I don't think it's a definitive book, and we'll talk about definitive histories here in a little bit, but it was a great experience for me. And just that experience of being a historian and being able to go and do interviews with people that had been here as prisoners of war, doing oral histories and traveling around. I was able to travel around Germany to do about 20 of those. That was a great experience. So anyway, that's how I would answer the first question, ignoring the other 2 components of it.
I'll chime in. With regard to some recent research, actually by a student here in the history department writing his senior thesis on basically sort of the Ogden area and Clearfield and some of the defense establishments here, using archival records from the National Archives. He was able to establish sort of the centrality of the Intermountain West, but specifically Utah, to the overall war project, if you will, or war mobilization. And so it was interesting to see him sort of address an area that is often ignored in terms of considering the way in which we actually transported things overseas and how we got them there from, say, factory to front line. And so Utah plays a key role in that as a logistical hub, as a warehouse, as a transportation network, and it was considered of paramount importance. And one of the reasons it becomes so important is because it's outside the pale of potential invasion by Japan, at least in some of the early planning and the response to Pearl Harbor was that something inland a little bit or east of Wendover would be a little safer than anything west.
I'll just add this. I was surprised when I was doing my own research and with all out for Uncle Sam that we had the largest naval supply depot in Utah in the world during World War II. And I thought, what? They're a naval supply depot? It kind of blew my mind. It's basically where Freeport Center is today. That's where it started. And on the other component is the POW camp here in Ogden was basically on 2nd Street, back where the business depot is now. And it was Italian POWs. And there's a bridge oral history project that was done in 2000. I can't remember exactly because it was before my time at the Stewart Library. But they captured interviews of individuals who were at the camp, and then individuals who married the POWs. So it's an interesting something I had never considered or even thought of that was here in Ogden for Northern Utah. So
that's wonderful. Thank you. So since Kent graciously gave us a bit of his background and how he got into World War II. Can the two of you kind of give us some background as to how World War II kind of beckoned you to study a little bit further?
All right, I'll say. For me, it was my grandfather. He was a World War II veteran. He was served in the Pacific, mostly a little bit of. He had a few places, but the one he was talked about the most, and I say talked about not very often, was Allan. And I was taking a class from John, and we had to do an oral history interview. It was the first one I'd ever done, and it was my grandfather. I was able to do that with my grandfather, and I learned so much about the experience. I don't think I can quite put into words what that experience was for me, but I thought, man, can I do this as a career? Can I actually turn this into something? And yeah, I can. And I've had the privilege of working on so many oral history projects through the Stewart Library that it all started as a student, is what I'm trying to say. And writing my thesis, working with Dr. Little and with John, going back to the National Archives, doing research. I just fell in love with Northern Utah specifically and what happened here on the homefront. And I just wanted to learn more about that. So that's what keeps me going.
Well, we both have a grandfather story there.
Wow.
Yeah. I grew up in the shadow of the war in the Pacific too. My grandfather was Marine, and I knew that he was, but he wouldn't speak of it when I was little. But I was driven to read about it and to learn about it. And subsequently, later in life, I was able to start asking him questions and better questions because I'd read a lot. And so the ability to conduct interviews, in one sense, I felt, especially of him, but then of others, was enhanced by the base of knowledge that I had. And sometimes, especially with veterans, there are these proverbial deer in headlight questions that don't go anywhere if you were to ask them certain questions. But I found that I could, by learning a lot about, say, a particular battle or experience as much as I could, then I could work my way around the periphery of the topic till they were comfortable, in certain cases, enough so that we could discuss uglier subjects potentially. And that relationship, and I feel like it's forming a relationship often with the person that you spend time with interviewing, especially if it's a long process. That's really how I could have immersed even as a little kid into World War II. And I didn't have any idea that it would ever become a job, but so be it.
That is wonderful. Thank you both for sharing. So since we've mentioned a lot about oral histories, as oral historians, what are the unique insights and emotional truths that Professor Little was just kind of alluding to about the Utah World War II experience that are only accessible through personal testimonies? And the second part to this question is, how do you treat that information as a reliable historical source?
Okay, I'm going to jump in here. I thought a lot about this specifically at Kinsey, because this is how I spend most of my time, is collecting these oral histories. The reality is they're not a definitive history. They're what they are is a glimpse into personal examples, personal stories, but they're okay. I'm kind of I get so excited. Okay, this is truly what I love. It's my passion. And over the course of collecting these stories, these histories, I learned that there was no one story alike, and yet they all had a similar theme of resilience and doing the best we can. The majority of them well, the majority of the women we interviewed would say, why do you want my story? I didn't do anything.
Yeah, you can.
And yet what they did was remarkable. And most of the veterans were, okay, well, I'll talk, but not about the war. And then by the end, because you develop that rapport, they're talking about stories that, wow, okay. Ironically, this is kind of a side note, when I would go by myself, the veterans wouldn't talk to me. So I specifically hired a male student to go with me, and they wouldn't look at me, they'd look at him and talk to him, and because they felt more comfortable. Which I don't find that interesting anymore, but at the time I was, why? But it's their mindset, it's the way they grew up, it's what they were comfortable with. And so I think I feel like I'm talking around the question, but those were some of the insights I gained. The emotional truths are, it was a time when we don't see anymore. When we talk about like community, there was a community feel during that time, especially in Ogden, that we just don't experience right now. And so that's interesting too, to look at that. Now I'm going to stop talking.
Thanks, Lorrie. I'll chime in. One of the challenges, as Lorrie has alluded to, about interviewing people, which we call oral instead of written, but I mean, it's just sometimes corroborating storylines and or elements of a story, and often that requires, if you wish to or attempt to, that requires various authentic documentation, and whether a service record or other histories that speak to a similar event and time and place that this person is discussing. And so some storylines can be verified or corroborated in certain ways, but what's, I think, exceedingly rich is that there are abundant stories that nobody's ever written. And part of the challenge is determining to some degree whether somebody has a corporate memory, what I would call a corporate memory, meaning like, well, we all felt this way after Pearl Harbor. How do you know? I mean, like we who? And there are just these truths, you could say, that people appropriate or formulate over time that they haven't thought, they haven't analyzed, they just accept as fact. It's true to them. And in that regard, over the past several years, I've interviewed two gentlemen who are, well, one just passed, but he was 100 years old, and the other just turned 100, and both were in the Navy in the Second World War. And their memories about some of their service were quite specific and richly, vibrantly detailed about certain things, which had the you could say the ring of truth to it about really nuanced types of details. But then there are other elements where you think, well, this is 70 plus years or so. It's been a long time. But certain neuroscience studies help to enrich my understanding of what memory involves and how we access it. And so sometimes we might remember something better, especially if it's a traumatic event, a long time after the initial event. Maybe we suppressed it out of necessity, or we lacked the language to describe it at the time. So maybe we thought about it over the years, and now it's coming to light. We also know that dementia helps to lift some of those barriers to disclosure. But what I think is most important is, rather than try and prove or disprove the story, is if this person's telling me something, say 50, 60, 70 years later, that's probably what's important to them. And that's probably what matters most for that person in what they do choose to remember or what they do have access to disclose. And so I think there's certain dignity to that testimony that they're offering, and that sense of intense emotion oftentimes there is conveyed, especially when they're dealing and discussing often really deplorable subjects.
I certainly agree with what's been said. Just a couple of additional points that I think need a little more emphasis. One is, as an oral historian, I think one of the most exciting, one of the most rewarding experiences is when you can take a person that says, I don't have a story, and go through the process and bring that out so that at the end of the interview, they have that feeling that, yes, I have made a contribution. Yes, my experience is valid, and thank me for going through the process of bringing that out and bringing that to their attention. The question we might come back to again is how do we deal with testimony that we at least feel is inadequate and inaccurate, I should say. And in interviewing some of these German prisoners of war I talked about, we got to the issue of the Holocaust, the films that these German prisoners of war were required to view as part of their prisoner of war experience here in the United States. And not everyone, but a few, said we couldn't believe it. Those films that we saw, it was simply Hollywood working overtime.
Right.
Yeah. Their perception then is, the Holocaust never happened. Whether it did or didn't, the important point is their view of it. And as you know, we continue to debate that still today. At least we have people that object to it, a few people.
That's great. Thanks. Anyone have anything else to add? Lorrie looks like,
Well,
I was seeing something happen down there.
no, I just great. Going with what Kent was saying, it's always interesting to me because I don't always know if what I'm hearing is accurate, but it's very first. It's the way they perceived it, or it's the way they remember it. And I just gotten to the point now where I'm instead of fact checking, okay, this is their story, this is their remembrance, and we just add it to the narrative, and then the researcher can then go and discover is this actually true, and getting to that point has helped me a lot, and to just listen instead of interjecting. But that didn't happen. Well, I won't get very far as an oral historian if I do that. So I just appreciate what Ken said.
Definitely. I love viewing it as an addition to the resource kit that historians have access to. So in that sense, having worked extensively with primary source documents in historic publications, what other types of records or sources, i.e. government documents, diaries, newspapers, have proven the most crucial in shaping the narrative of Utah's involvement at the night?
Okay.
Well, for myself specifically, thinking about my thesis, I worked extensively with primary materials. In fact, I felt bad because I had maybe 2 secondary sources, and I felt, is he even going to accept my thesis? He did, thank God. But there were 6 logbooks in the canteen that I should have had access to, but only 3 were available. I have no idea where the other 3 went. And I felt what happened during those other 3 years.
Right.
Well, we have the diary of the canteen chairman, Maud Porter, in the Stewart Library. She kept a diary from 1919 until the day she died. And I was able to go and look, and it just kind of blew my mind because the canteen was such a part of her life. Every day she wrote about it. Even if it was, went to the canteen, it's running smoothly. So that became a rich resource for me that I was able to look at. So sometimes it's just knowing where to go, asking the questions, using resources. Dr. Little gave me some of the best advice I ever received.
Okay.
When I went back to the National Archives, he said, don't just look at the material that is relevant to you. Expand a little bit, try something new. And because of that, I found the whole thing about 25th Street. It was actually, the Army had actually written, the Recreations Department of the Army had written this whole thing about how dangerous 25th Street was to the soldiers because they were leaving with venereal diseases. And basically say, don't let them get off the train and do what they want on 25th Street. I had no idea that was a thing, but because I listened, I found these amazing resources. So it's tough. Anyway.
For those of us that aren't aware, can you share just a little bit of crash course into the canteen and kind of what was happening at Ogden at the time? I know I'm opening a can of worms. But...
Yeah.
A cantina worms.
Oh.
Yeah, you kind of are just a little bit, because I can talk about this all day. Don't turn that back on. Okay, you all can hear me? I can hear it now. Okay. So during World War II, well, they started in World War I, the canteens, to feed soldiers basically in transit. So they were basically at a railroad, I can't say railroad, railway stations, ports, but because Utah's a railroad, or Ogden's a railroad town, they were asked, well, why don't we have one here? And so why they asked Maud Porter to do it, I don't know, other than she's a D. That could have been it. She said, okay, I'll do it. And really there was not any, like, this is how you create a canteen. There was a little bit of information, but not a whole lot. So basically she just went, okay, I'm assuming, I'm doing a lot of assuming here. Because of the way she was raised, her father being Thomas D., she was raised to give back because she had so much. So she just got her hands dirty and started working, and had the canteen operational. They decided to open it up in December of 1941. Had it ready to open in March of 1942. And it became one of the busiest canteens in the Pacific region of the Red Cross, because the Red Cross had regions, and for some reason Utah's in the Pacific region. Not sure why. That in itself was amazing to me because I had never heard about it. No one had ever written on it. And going through the logbooks, wow. The soldiers that would come through, especially in the beginning, were all from Pearl Harbor, a lot of them from Pearl Harbor. And in the logbooks, it talks about there'd sometimes have to be a first aid to some of these soldiers because they were just bandaged and hurt. They would help with uniforms, sew on buttons. They became like their moms up to some of these soldiers. And I'll just share one of my favorite stories of the canteen. And that is mothers whose sons were serving overseas. It was their birthday. They wanted to somehow give back. So they would bake a cake, send it to the canteen, and the soldiers coming through would get a taste of home eating this cake. That's one of my favorite stories of the canteen. Anyway, I could talk forever about it, but I won't. I'll shut up now.
Well, no, because I'm going to ask a follow-up question.
Oh,
and I'm not going to be the only one asking questions. Right at the end, we'll have time for an open Q&A. So if you're thinking of any questions, you all get a turn, I promise. Well, maybe not everybody, but we'll try and give as many people as we can a chance to ask questions too. But so, Lorrie, how can these micro-histories of community support and volunteerism that you just talked about tell us about the spirit of the Utah homefront, that the large-scale military histories that we tend to gravitate towards may overlook?
You know, when we talk about World War II, we tend to specifically talk about the soldiers and the battles and all that happened, we don't often think about what's happening at home. That's becoming more of a thing, I've realized. But in Ogden, they just wanted to feel like they were contributing somehow. Even the high schoolers would do these drives to collect aluminum and food, and there's pictures of them doing first aid classes at Ogden High during World War II. So that there's this sense of community, like I mentioned before, that I don't think, at least my generation, isn't accustomed to, being a Gen X. And that's just kind of trickled down. But learning about what happened here during the war has brought a sense for me that there's a rich history that is untapped here. I feel like I'm talking in circles, but I'm not sure I can adequately describe what I want to say, other than because of the work that's been done, because of the oral histories that we have a glimpse into what happened. Not a definitive, like we talked, a definitive narrative, but we have an idea. And I think that's why we keep coming back to that time. Not because of the forgive me, I'm tired, so I'm losing my words. So I apologize. Yeah, I'm struggling with the rest of that, but I hope I've adequately described what it is I was trying to say.
Thank you.
Do you have anything to add?
Someone add something, Ken?
Have I had the microphone on the whole time?
You're good. There you go.
There we go. Well, since we're talking about favorite stories, if that's okay. What I'm thinking of took place at Ogden at the defense depot, involving a prisoner of war that had been actually shot at Salina during that July 1945 event, when 9 prisoners of war were actually killed by an American guard. But he was wounded and then sent up to Ogden and was working in the defense depot. Not just other prisoners of war, there was a fair number of female employees there that they were working with. And as he describes the story, these female employees were in coveralls and hard to tell whether they were females or males. And so the Germans were battering the question back and forth, and with one particular young lady. Well, they didn't know she was a young lady at this point. And so Herbert got enough courage up when they were alone to ask the lady, "Are you a girl or are you a boy?" And he describes it this way: "She threw her arms around me, planted a big kiss on my lips, and said, 'Now can you tell?'" That's one of those little stories, you don't get unless you do an oral history interview.
So let's keep with that trend. Will you kind of talk through the process of Utah Remembers World War II and you're collecting oral histories and kind of your project with the Historical Society, and what that process was like and what it meant to you to work on that project?
Yeah.
Well, the book Utah Remembers World War II was published on the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II. And so we organized a committee made up of a number of veterans of World War II, including George Allan, who received the Medal of Honor and for whom the Veteran Center is named. and we discussed what would be a lasting contribution that we could make for commemorating the 50th anniversary. And this idea of a book came up, and I took it to my boss and said, this is what they would like to do. Can I have time to work on it? So he graciously gave me the permission. And so we sent out announcements that this project was in process. We were not collecting only for the book, but to have an archive at the Historical Society of World War II experiences. And as we got into it, we came to realize that there were probably 3 or 4 characteristics that we wanted to include. One certainly was the military experience, from someone that was at Pearl Harbor to the Bataan Death March, the invasion at Normandy, the liberation of Branden, all of those things. So there were plenty of those people to interview. The second we wanted was the homefront contribution, specifically women and children and their experiences, but also there were some males who were there who, in one case, a doctor down in Price who tried to join the Army for 4 years, and they kept rejecting him, saying, "You're the only doctor in the area, you need to stay here." So that was another category. A third was to look at the experience of World War II from a global perspective. And so we included, for example, a Navajo code talker, a Japanese American from Garland who was in the 442nd Regiment, and another who was a translator in the Pacific and translated for a number of the admirals and generals that were captured in Branden. Also included a German prisoner of war that had come here. We also included a war bride from England and a native of Ogden who became romantically involved with one of the Italian prisoners of war and ended up being married, and he immigrated back to Ogden. And the fourth category was we wanted this to represent all of Utah. We wanted people from St. George. We had a nurse from Randolph and Woodruff in Rich County, which has to be one of the most isolated places still. I know that because we drive through it all the time on our journey to my wife's home in Wyoming in Afton. We have people in San Juan County, in Moab, Salt Lake, of course. So that was another thing that we wanted to include. Now, did we produce a definitive history? By no means. Did we include everyone that we wanted to? Certainly not. But at least it was a beginning. And I think we attained the goal that we were striving for, is to show again that everyone has a story, everyone has a unique experience that we would like to capture and have available for those that are interested in the topic.
Can you speak to what was one of the most surprising or significant themes you found in your book?
Maybe two, and I mentioned the one, this idea that everyone's story is important, has relevance. I think I understood that a little bit, but I certainly understood a lot more once we had finished the project. The other was just the intensity of the World War II experience. And I'm not sure in my life I have gone through, even during the Vietnam era, the kind of intensity that came out in those interviews and the histories.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, Dr. Little, your turn. So let's have you speak to the interplay between World War I and World War II. If you might give us some historical through lines or kind of changes in the study and understanding of World War I versus World War II.
Okay. Well, a couple thoughts, thinking to connect to Ken's books, including your Utah and World War I. And when I teach a seminar on World War I assign that book even though it's a global course on the conflict. And in the current course this semester, I'm teaching on World War II. But and this one is the American experience in World War II. I'm actually assigned Yoshiko Uchida's Desert Exile, which is about her experience, or at least much of it's about her time in Topaz and the internment camp, written from the perspective of a college student. And one of the reasons that I assigned your compilation of World War I in a global course, and then Uchida's book in an American course, is because I figure students who are probably mostly local will be able to relate better and to see the ways in which the local is global. And then we broaden those conversations to recognize such things that captivity stories are global. They're not exclusively American, but there are distinctive elements that are particular to Utah that you could take a field trip there. You could drive down to you could drive to Delta and spend the day at the museum. You could drive up to Minidoka if you want, to the other the other most close internment site. And so these lenses, as I view them, by which we can shift our focal point from the global, the big panorama, to, you could say, the micro stories, the individual stories that come out most vividly in oral histories and diaries and letters and these artifacts of the past that really, or even sheet music. Of course, World War II had great music. So that's one reason to study it, is good music. Good movies too. But these, you could say, these vivid voices shed light on these bigger stories. And so thinking of one of the dynamics that I think is intriguing about that global and local that connects maybe the World War I and II storyline. We've started to pay a lot more attention over the past 10 or 15 years to demographics in the United States during the First World War. For the longest time, there was a narrow-minded assumption that whoever had immigrated here had wanted nothing to do with the rest of the world. That's why they came here. But nothing's farther from the truth. Their heartstrings were pulled when the world exploded. And how could they not have been? And so Utah convulses in the First World War just the same as every other part of the nation, in part because it was an exceedingly immigrant nation. And we tend to dismiss that, or at least in the history writing, for the longest time. We don't do that so much anymore, thankfully, because we've got a more complex, composite understanding of the peoples. Xenophobia was rampant in World War I, especially once the U.S. marches off to fighting Germany. And of course, there are strong German elements within Utah proper that make the story interesting all the way up to the governor's office. And in the Second World War, of course, in terms of this global and local storyline, of course, the Empire of Japan strikes the United States in 1941. And people like Wat Misaka, Utah Japanese American, local student here at Weber State, and ultimately he's okay in one sense, and goes on to play Major League or National League, National Basketball Association. It's baseball night. I'm sorry, but go Dodgers. But then people like Uchida get transported from California, smack dab right out of UC Berkeley, where she was an undergrad, and are dumped into Utah in prison. And so it's these personal accounts that I think help us to better understand how the story has been sanitized so often, how we mythologize, especially World War II. The American story is generally it's a positive story. I mean, I'd say the grand narrative of both world wars is Americans get in the wars late. They've been raging for a while. They get in late. They fight, they win, and they come home and party. It's the roaring 20s. after World War I, and then it's the baby boom after World War II. I mean, what could be better? And so there is this sense of victory. There's this sense of euphoria, but I think that we underestimate. If you really dig in the sources, and even if you look at the contemporary records of films like Best Years of Our Lives, that came out in 1946, you'll see that there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of trepidation, a lot of worry among veterans coming home, their families and their friends as they're reconnecting. What do you do with veterans? How do they fit back in? Are they going to be violent? How do you reintegrate them? Can you? Are they damaged too much? And we overlook all of that. Moreover, there's a world that's been devastated in places like Europe and in World War II and Asia also. And the American people had a sense to rebuild after both world wars, although we tend only to focus on rebuilding Europe at the end of World War II. But Americans do it at the end of World War I and II. And it's actually the same people who do it in both world wars. So in that regard, there's far greater continuity between the conflicts. But I think we have a much richer sense of the fact that there's a lot of people who felt in both conflicts who were left out, or they got the brunt end of the stick with regard to democracy. We're championing democracy and we're fighting for these principles, lofty as they are, necessary as I believe them to be. But there's people who didn't have the right to vote, who are drafted. There's people who weren't citizens who get ensnared by this. There are people who are citizens who are imprisoned without due process in both world wars, whether Eugene Debs, who's the key third-party candidate and imprisoned by the president of the United States in World War I for being a critic of the war. How's that for weaponization of politics? Eugene Debs. Or Japanese Americans, in the case of the World War II example, as just one of many. And so I think as we consider these things, what is it about the war that we would wish to emphasize? We can't obviously do it all. And so giving people a voice is one of these critical elements.
Wonderful, thank you. So for a final question on my end, I'd like each of you to answer this one. Why is World War II still compelling to us today? And then why do you continue to study World War II?
Cookie.
I may answer. You mentioned a lot, Masaka, and I had to, and we did an interview at the oral history. I can use my words, an oral history interview. And one of the interesting things he mentioned was that after Pearl Harbor, he was actually called by the president of Weber State University and asked not to go to school the next day. He was asked to stay home. For his own safety, he was told. It's an interesting story. But the one that I would never even have thought to ask. My gosh. I would know now, but I was still a pretty young oral historian at that time. And that hadn't come to my mind. But stories like that are what make doing this work so compelling. And I was extremely naive when I started researching World War II. There is a part in the canteen logbooks where the women encounter an African American soldier who was drunk, and it didn't go well. And the part about it that shocked me as a naive, sheltered girl from Utah was that she used language that I didn't think was used in Utah. Woke me up. I literally sat and cried when I read those words. Now I don't cry. I'm still saddened by it, but I'm not shocked anymore. But this to me is why it's compelling. I have grown as a person as I have studied and researched World War II. I've gotten to know my grandfather better. There were stories that he told I'd never heard of. within my own family. Yeah, blew my mind. So that's why it's compelling to me. I learn something every time I delve in or I reread an oral history interview. I learn a different little aspect that I hadn't picked up before. So
I still cry. Some of this material just rips at my heart. And I think one of the reasons why I still immerse myself in often unpleasant subjects, and some of this is awfully unpleasant, is in part to try and dignify the individuals who went through these harrowing experiences and somehow survived, or parts of them did. And part of, I guess, kind of my unstated, I'm letting you know my ulterior motivations. How about that? Confession's good for the soul, I've heard. But often I see in my World War II seminar, I have a number of retirees who take the course as part of the Lifetime Learner program here at Weber State. And they bring me just even like today, bring me some of the materials from their fathers to discuss and to consider like what they may have meant and things of this nature. And there's a special trust there that I feel to help narrate these materials best that I can. But oftentimes what I find, especially with that the children, and I think also the grandchildren who grew up with it, not everybody does, but there are some of us who did, is to try and help them make sense of it. And for a lot of the children of World War II veterans who, like, Daddy didn't talk about it, and Daddy was often silent or moody, or if there was ever any loud noise, he didn't like it, or in other words, Daddy was exhibiting all sorts of signs of what we would call PTSD today. Daddy was, say, really violent or drunk or other behavioral problems, and they didn't understand why Daddy was that way. And so one of the things that we don't tend to write about in these nostalgic histories are the horrors that often soldiers experience, or families ultimately. Civilians get a lot of it too, and especially overseas in war-devastated places. And we tend to diminish how bad things were. And so one of my sort of missions, if you will, in life is to try and expose and amplify that thread of how bad things were, so that students that I have, especially if they're in ROTC, that they don't leave with the impression that war is somehow clean and neat and that they're going to walk away unaffected, because I can guarantee they won't. And their families will be affected too. So it's a bigger commitment than they realize often, especially at that age. And so seeing some of the ways and trying to incorporate you could say those traumatic elements more vibrantly by using the voices and using these records from hospitals, among other places, to enrich these storylines, to see the way that some of this stuff echoes for decades and their entire lives, is a way to suggest that war never ends in the lives of its participants. Please. But
Yes, I'd say amen to that. And I think for me to, again, give value to the lives of others, no matter what the experience has been, whether it was a very positive, a very humane experience, as I dealt with most of the prisoners of war, or a traumatic experience. We include in the Utah Remembers book an account simply labeled anonymous, which is an interview that a doctor did of one of these people suffering from traumatic disorder. And it chills me just to read that, even now, 30 years after we published the book. The other reason I think I'm involved is because I'm still learning. Lorrie's account of the canteens, I knew that there were trains that came through and some people were there and passed out coffee and donuts, but I assume, well, I know in your article, which was published in the Quarterly, Utah Historical Quarterly, we see a whole deeper view of that experience and the connection between World War I and World War II. How did we seem? Well, that seems to be a question that is often asked. How did such a thing repeat itself only 20 years later? And as we face such a unsettled world today, I think having a knowledge of those kinds of things helps us to hopefully make the right choices as we move forward, and we don't find ourselves not here anymore because we chose wrong.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Okay. I'd like to open it up. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask the panel? Okay. And then come bring the mic and choose. We're going to play past.
Can I just speak pretty well?
Okay, go ahead.
So if suddenly a sabbatical fell out of the sky with a big grant, you could pursue one avenue of research, what would you choose to pursue? You got along with space.
You sound like a deer in headlights now.
Wow.
Oh, I have one project that I know a couple of years ago I mentioned to Kent, and I just don't have the support or the time to really get it rolling, but I think it's an eminently doable Utah project, even though it deals with the prequel of World War II, if that's okay. World War I.
Allow it.
Is that there are these anecdotes about wounded soldiers returning home, and often because of the types of injuries they sustained or the lack of care they received upon coming home, that they died earlier than the rest of their cohort of people in their peer group. In other words, do the wounded die at an accelerated rate? I think we could track that with the genealogical resources in this state about Utah wounded. Actually, probably from either conflict, even though that's a bigger data set for World War II. But the World War I, it isn't actually that large. And I imagine those records could be trackable, provided there was some people who knew how to, wield to do the biographical research and then also some of the computational stuff. But I think that would be an interesting sort of test study, a case study into these things. I know one of the stories, or one that was in your World War I anthology, there was a soldier who comes back and he's sufficiently traumatized, he commits suicide. And I would say he qualifies under those categories. And when we think about war memorials, and there was a great work done by the state and the History Commission for World War I a few years ago to try and determine where the memorials were located and to commemorate World War I. But what happens if you die of war wounds sometime later? Or what happens if you kill yourself much later? Or when don't you get on the memorial?
Good.
And we grapple with these questions with regard to the Vietnam Memorial. And there are always advocates, especially families and loved ones who want their loved one on there, and they believe that they should be. Maybe they died of Agent Orange or some other challenge subsequently. And these questions of record keeping relate to people. And so I think that's a project that I'd love to kind of incubate if I had the resources. So talk to the trustees, if you will, and who knows, maybe they'll bless us with time. Hey, Lorrie? Yeah.
I actually thought of one as he was talking. My favorite photograph during the World War II time that we found is, I actually have it in my office. It's of two women working at Hill. It was hill-filled at the time. And they're in what looks like they're either their husbands or their brothers' clothes. The pant legs are rolled up because they're too long. The shirts are obviously too big for them. But they're still wearing their nicer shoes. They don't have any other shoes. And they're working on an airplane engine. And so I think it would be interesting to delve into the contribution that women made during World War II. In the sense that a lot of them were asked to go, do your part. But as soon as the war was over, they were told, okay, now you have to go back into the kitchen and raise a family and let the men work. What surprised me in gathering oral histories was how many women basically said, no, I'm going to keep working. They found a sense of independence that they wanted to maintain. Wouldn't it be interesting to find more of those stories, to create an entire project and maybe an exhibit? This is where my mind goes on that demographic of World War II that isn't often looked at.
And do you have a research topic?
Well,
Fine.
I'm coming to get it in focus thanks to the comments here. I think I mentioned that, well, first of all, I am a baby boomer, born in 1946. I graduated from high school in 1964, and then Vietnam came along less than a year later. I've been looking at my classmates and the experience they had with the military with regards to Vietnam. Several were drafted, others joined to miss out on the draft. Some of us joined the Army Reserves, others, for health reasons, missed it. But we all grew up fighting Germans, at least in our backyards and in the barns around town. And I've wondered just what that World War II legacy had on my generation in terms of the perspectives on Vietnam.
Yes.
Interesting.
Interesting. Okay, well, because of time, we're going to end there. But I was wondering if we can all give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you for your insights and your perspectives. We deeply appreciate the contributions you guys have made to this conversation tonight. And we thank you all for joining the Utah Historical Society's Perspectives Lecture Series. Have a great night.
Thanks.